Welcome to Arvid and Tyler Catch Up. I'm Arvid.
I'm Tyler. Let's catch up.
Yeah, let's catch up. It's been a while, right? It's been 2 weeks now that we
Yeah.
haven't chatted. I
hmm
think I think there are a lot of things that we can talk about today. I think a lot happened in both of our lives over the last week. Do you want to
Yeah.
get started? Do you want to open with the big bang, if there's one?
um, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So as of this moment, we haven't yet publicly announced this, but we went through a bunch of big strategic changes at the Calm Fund in the last couple of weeks. So there was some good news, which is, we closed our fourth fund. The business of being in fund management is always funny. You close a new fund and it's sort of like, hooray, we get to stay in business, so that was great. We got that done on a pretty tight timeline. I've talked a little bit publicly. I don't think we've talked that much on the podcast about like kind of the challenges we went through working on that last fourth fund over the last year. It's been quite the roller coaster in that respects. But when the fourth fund came in, our business is a little weird in the sense that, for folks who aren't familiar with the fund management business, you have this management company, which is the people that do all the sourcing of the investments, the actual investing, the helping the portfolio, all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of its own little small business. And then you have these funds that you raise, and that's a pool of capital that most of it goes to investing in startups. But a slice of it goes to the management company to kind of run your operations. And so in the short term, your ability to fund your management company is a function of your ability to fundraise. In the long term, the success is a function of how well the funds do. But in the short term, it's not a function of how well the funds do. It's how well can you sell the idea of, more investors coming in. So we looked at, the budget where we were with the fourth fund and basically had to make some tough decisions around scaling back the management company to get the management company to be default alive, to be break even. So that was tough. It was, the first time I've ever had to do like a significant round of layoffs. So we laid off a chunk of the team. And then we also had to pare back a bunch of our kind of non-core activities, right? Sort of said, what's the main job we do, which is invest in calm companies and support the portfolio founders. And we had to really get super focused on that, which is to say we're really not going to do anything else but this one job super well, and we're going to pare back everything else. So that was an exciting and interesting 2 weeks. Basically, was coming to that decision and then executing that decision for sure. So
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
it sounds like you overextended a little bit in some regards. Would you consider that to be the case?
On purpose. Yeah.
Right.
So the way that we had set up the management company was, we knew we were raising relatively small funds in the scheme of things. We're still able to invest in, maybe 24 or so companies a year. So it's still a big impact. But in the scheme of, venture capital and all this world of investing in startups, it's kind of small potatoes. So we started small and we knew there was a big opportunity to invest in lots and lots and lots of calm companies. So one of the things we did was we raised a separate slice of capital directly into the management company. So again, if you think about the management company is this small business, business is operating these funds, and then the funds are these separate pools of capital that go and invest into startups. We raised some money, about 1.5 million 2 years ago, that went straight into the management company, just like a startup. You basically think of it as like a seed round, right? And then we did normal startup stuff, which is you basically run your business unprofitably for a little while. That's the whole point of raising the money, is to scale up the team and make a bunch of investments, in terms of like not investments into startups, but investments into infrastructure and products and processes and team to be able to support a bigger, enterprise, right? And then the goal was to raise much bigger funds, to be able to get back to break even, right? So that's the kind of trajectory that we were trying to get to. And you can kind of think of it as like, you raised a seed round, then you run your company unprofitably, you are on a trajectory to, you need to triple your MRR to get back to break even. And you look at the numbers and you say, well, we're not going to get there, right? We're not going to get to triple our MRR before our cash runs out. So we need to either raise revenue faster or we need to cut costs. And that's kind of the position that we were in, where we tried our very best to raise the revenue faster in the form of fundraising. Said we're not going to get there, so we had to cut costs to get to break even, just like kind of any other. Well, frankly, like a lot of startups are facing right now, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering how much of this was just like purely like large scale economics that everybody's suffering through, and how much of that is just like a kind of a ripple effect of other people already struggling, because I would assume that there's it's just, particularly with investment, it arrives a bit late because it's not immediately at the level of, oh, our customers aren't paying us money anymore, but it comes at a later stage where you figure out, oh, certain things are not as received anymore as they used to be. Is that what you're experiencing here?
I mean, a little bit. The thing is just that the market for fundraising, for raising capital from especially institutional LPs, is not a particularly rational market, right? So in some respects, like, you're right. So some of the dynamics that I kind of laid out in some other documents that I've written for folks that are public, is the fact that a lot of the folks we were talking to raise the larger fund, they are suffering from some of this like macro stuff, right? So they invested in a lot of other venture capital funds and private equity funds. A lot of those are not doing very well, or even worse, they're kind of like not doing well, but everyone expects them to start doing really badly in the near future. And so they're just very hesitant to make new investments. And so even though like our funds are doing really well, like the kind of calm fund ethos is actually really well positioned in this market right now, right? So like our portfolio is doing great, much better than a portfolio of companies that's dependent on raising a Series A right now. But the folks that we were talking to raise that much larger fund are just kind of unable to write those checks right now. So there's an element of that that's just like kind of macro stuff, but there's also some stuff that's very particular quirks of of the fundraising business, because it's very, it's not super rational. It's kind of very expectations driven, I guess. Because you have a lot of companies right now that are like, like if you look at our own portfolio, right, they're still able to grow. They're still growing from their customers despite, headwinds in the economy. And that's because when you have like much more rational, like, yeah, we have this great software, you need it, like you should work with us, it's a lot easier to get it done, versus the commitment to make new investments is just a little bit of a weirder transaction,
Yeah,
So
I would think that like just the abstraction level of money, right, compared
yeah,
to an actual service being exchanged, but like dealing with investments that generate money from other people generating money, the
yeah,
further like up this abstraction layer you get, the more it becomes cloudy and kind of you have these social psychology things of the market and whatever that might mean, right?
totally.
These complexities play into it. Well, one thing that I kind of like about this, even though it sucks to kind of have to downsize, is you're treating this even more like a bootstrapped calm business at this point. That's
Yeah,
kind of what I
yeah,
love about this, kind of forced bootstrapping ship, I guess, or bootstrapperness, but it is, you really need this to be like a revenue centric business at this point. This is kind of nice to see, because that's what I like to see as more businesses. Of course, when funding is
yeah.
involved, it becomes a bit muddy, but it's kind of nice to see that that is also an option that you can choose as a fund, because that blows my mind in a way, right? That a fund can now still like take large investments, and distribute them, but still operate like one of the people that they distributed to, which is just
Yeah.
so much more aligned. I quite like that.
No, you're totally right. I mean, it was funny as I was like, as I was working through, obviously laying off, a chunk of the team is a big decision. So I was getting a lot of advice from folks and getting a lot of feedback. And, over and over again, I basically got my own kind of calm company advice being parroted back at me, which is just stuff like make sure that you stay in the game, right?
Yeah.
The most important thing is to, not burn out and not have the company crash into a wall. And you'll figure it out along the way, right? You can be long-term ambitious, not short-term ambitious. And long-term ambitious means stay in the game, be on a sort of sustainable path and then be more opportunistic. Whereas we had sort of gotten ourselves into a position that we often try to guide founders to avoid, which is we
Mhm.
have to raise a bunch more money in order to keep the company in business. And, it's like I was having almost mirror images of conversations that I had been having with, other founders recently, where they raised maybe a little more money when times were good. They had
Mhm.
staffed up a little too hot aggressively, and they were putting themselves on, I call it like having the treadmill up to 11. It's like you have to run really fast just to stay in place. And one of the ways out of that is to just turn the treadmill down. Treadmill being like your cost, your burn rate, right? And so it sucks to have to lay people off, but sometimes if you want the business, the company to make it for the long haul, you have to make these kinds of, tough calls. And then you put yourself in a position to ride things out a little more smoothly and also pounce on opportunities when the timing is perfect versus trying to force the timing to be right. So now from our perspective, when we're talking to some of these large investors, like the timing was terrible for them. They had maximum uncertainty, in the last
Mhm.
quarter, and so it was a terrible time to be really putting the hard sell on them to say like now or never. So now we put ourselves in a position to say, look, we're around. Like if it's 6 months from now, 18 months from now, 6 years from now, like we'll be here. So let's have that conversation when the timing is right. So yeah.
It sure sounds like it's way more sustainable and calmer in many ways. I do
It's
wonder.
going to get there, yeah. It's,
Right.
I mean,
It
it's
has the
been an
potential, right?
uncalm couple of weeks for sure. Yeah, I will say. I,
Do
I fully empathize a lot with folks who have to go through layoffs. It is the absolute worst thing. I mean,
Yeah.
just like brutal, especially when it's not for any good reason other than, basically yourself. I mean, I have to take responsibility for the decisions for that. And it's really sucks to tell people like, you're doing a great job, but we can't keep you around, So not fun.
Yeah, I do wonder though, like just comparing the two like states of mind that you were in, the one
Mm,
before where you still had people employed but you knew it was super shaky, and the
yeah.
one now where it probably was super rough to let them go, but at least you know that you're on a different trajectory. Like how was that? Like how do you feel better now? In terms of safer or less stressed, like what's your anxiety level rating between these two states?
Yeah, way, way, way down. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I mean, something I often am coaching founders through in the moment is this idea that it's actually not that stressful to really only have one option, right? In the sense that, like when I talk to advisors, like there was no decision, right? I mean, 100% of people that I had this conversations with said, look, I'm thinking about doing this. Everybody said that's exactly what you need to do. There's nobody made any credible arguments for any other path
Yeah.
forward. And so that's not that stressful, right? What's
Yeah.
stressful can be when, you have a bunch of options and it's really difficult to figure out which one to take and all that sort of stuff. But once the path really narrows down to one, I don't find it to be that stressful. It's definitely not, fun in the moment, but you get over it pretty quickly. And yeah, I mean, next week, going forward, once the dust settles, I think I am optimistic about, having things be operating on a calmer basis. I think, you know, it's a lot of the stuff that we're tweeting about over here is true, right? It is
Mhm.
very difficult to make the best long-term decisions for a company when you have a short-term challenge on the horizon, right? When you're staring down at, okay, we have 10 months of runway right now. We have to make some big moves in 4 or 5 months before, otherwise we're going to have to, all that kind of stuff. Like it's just difficult to make the best decisions. And when you reset to an infinite runway to say, okay, well, we're in business for now. It is so much easier to make the best decisions that you possibly can.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also just, it's better, I think, overall for mental health and stuff like that. But I think, I don't regret a lot of this stuff. I think we made a good bet at the time. I mean, I think I also would have been a lot calmer had we raised $100 million fund four, right?
Yeah.
And I think we made like a really good sort of swing at that. So I don't think it was a bad decision to kind of make that play. Um, but sometimes you can make a bet that is likelier than not to pan out, but still you kind of hit the unlucky side of that equation. So yeah.
Yeah, it's still a bet, right? Like
Right.
all the things we do are still essentially games of chance, which is
Yep.
rather high, yet not 100%
Yeah.
chance of success. I
Do
kind
you
of like
play
that
much,
perspective, right?
do you
Go
play
ahead.
much poker, Arvid? You ever play poker?
No, I don't. But
Uh,
I do know how to play, like really badly. I play
yeah.
poker super badly. So there you go.
I think you might like it actually. It's so I play it, I would say, semi seriously. Like I
Mm,
in the past have studied poker and like bought
okay.
books and stuff like that, and played for stakes that were meaningful to me
Hmm.
in big chunks. And one of the things you get really used to, and poker is a really great simulation of this idea of like expected value bets,
Hmm.
right? So you make a good bet, which is like, it's constrained enough that you can actually know the odds, and you
Yeah.
can say, yeah, like I made this bet where I was getting paid the potential to get paid 4-1 with 5-1 odds to hit, right, or something like that. And
Yeah.
so that's a good bet for me to make. You should make that over and over again all day long. But still, a good chunk of the time, that good bet is going to hit the 20%, 40%, whatever it is, where you lose, right? And you have to kind of get really comfortable with this idea of like, that was a good bet. And then I kind of like literally let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
And I think that's been like really good sort of training for me on a lot of these things, is just understanding like, yeah, you can't be, outcome oriented, right? Just because it didn't go the way that you expected it to doesn't mean that it was a bad bet, right? Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I love this
Yeah.
because, like, poker to me, as I understand it, having watched a couple of intense games on Twitch, because that apparently is a place where you can watch people play
Ah,
like real life
like
poker tournaments
online?
and stuff. It's really
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, it's real tournaments just being broadcast there. It's like it's a
Cool.
game technically, so it qualifies for Twitch.
Yep.
And what I see is people making these good bets, hopefully good bets, sometimes not so good, but still bets, and the only thing that really matters is that they don't overextend with the bet. That's all it is, right? Like it is a bet. You may win, you may not, but after the bet, you still have to have a couple chips left to be able to keep
Totally.
playing, right? And I like this as an analogy for entrepreneurship because that's like every single thing we try, every little experiment should be one that if it works, great, and if not, great, we learn something and we can still do more things in the future. It's kind of
Yep.
how I want that. That to me is also calmness, knowing that the outcome of your current bet is not like do or die for the whole thing that you're doing, right? It's not going to break everything if it doesn't work out, which is a lot what I see when people start freelancing and they have like one big client and
Mm,
everything with that one client needs to work out, otherwise they don't have an income anymore for the month. Like they overextend into these whale customers. You see that with software businesses too. I see several SaaS businesses that I am in contact with, also like businesses that I consulted with in the past, back in my pre-entrepreneurship days where I just was a software consultant, and I saw
mhm.
these businesses with like 20, 25, 30 employees having two gigantic customers, and that was their whole customer base. It was like, ugh, you're effectively their agency now. And if they don't like what you're doing, you have like you lose half of your income, like one of
Yeah.
each, right? Like one customer would break your business, one customer leaving. So that is to me the opposite of what a calm business does, right? Like
Yeah.
overcommitting to a single experiment, a single customer, a single client relationship, whatever it might be. Good to see that, and I retract my question, I guess, or my initial feeling that you may have overextended. I don't think you overextended at all. You just did things
Hmm.
and you tried them, and it didn't work the way that you would have liked it to work. But you're still doing the thing you want to do, which is support bootstrap businesses on that journey. So I don't think it was an extension in the first place. The only thing that I'm kind of sad to see going, or at least for the time being, is the kind of the community efforts, right?
Mm.
That stuff, like particularly with the founder summit, as I assume it's going to be in hiatus for a bit. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. We canceled the slate of summits for this year, unfortunately, which is a major bummer.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
it's part of
That's
this
what it
game.
is.
Focus. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it'll be forever. We'll probably bring them back at some point, but
Yeah.
yeah, they're a lot of work, and with a much smaller team, we just didn't have the resources to pull it
Yeah.
off at the level that I want. And it's not, we're not an events company, right? We're
Yeah,
an investment.
exactly. And
So,
you don't claim to be, right? You don't claim to be one either, and you probably don't even want to be one. I don't know. Like maybe there's a future for you being event evangelist for these kind of things, but
I'd love to decentralize that a little bit, to be
yeah.
honest. Like, I would love to support a bunch of folks that are sort of calm aligned building
Mhm.
events. So, actually, I'll put a sort of thread out there with if anybody else is running an event somewhere that they think, founders of calm companies would love to join. I'd love to aggregate a bunch of those and
Yeah.
provide those as opportunities for folks to go, because I think the value of getting together is tremendous. And I mean, you were just at MicroConf last week, so I want to hear about that as well. Like, we
Mhm.
need a whole ecosystem of those kinds of opportunities, and would love to support a bunch of them. But yeah, for now, we're not going to be able to throw our own. So yeah,
Well, we'll see what the future holds. I can talk about MicroConf because I have a
let's do
lot
it.
to say about
Yeah,
that
tell me.
event. Well, one of the things that I came out with, let's just completely do the reverse history situation here. When I flew back home from Denver, I was like, I want to go to more of this. Right?
Mm,
Which is it's kind of why I'm so sad that the Founder Summit is not happening, because that would be more of this. And
sure.
any opportunity to meet founders who are so value aligned with what I like and what I did and what I want other people to do, any founder, any group of founders, be it 5 people or 250 people, like at MicroConf, is a great opportunity to just like encourage each other and spread the word and motivate each other. Right? That's kind of what I want to do more of. So I'm gonna see if I can jumpstart some kind of meetup situation here in my area or virtually or
Cool.
whatever, because I just want to hang out with more people. It's really what I want.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole reason why we started this podcast, and I started like having people on my own show, is because like, hanging out in my basement all by myself, plus my dog, which is great, but not enough. That was not enough, right? I wanted
Yeah.
to be with people, and MicroConf gave me that opportunity. So I'm just gonna give you a quick walkthrough because there's a lot that I
Yeah.
experienced in this week. First off, Denver, it was really awesome. It's a great place to be. Just even
Mm,
flying into Denver from Toronto was quite the exciting thing for me as a European. Just the scope of North America is always a sight to behold. Like I'm used to, you fly to a city, it takes you like half an hour, and all you see is like villages and mountains and that kind of stuff. Nothing of which happened on my flight to Denver. It was just fields and agrarian areas and everything. It was super flat. It was really cool. Flying in the last like 5 minutes, all of a sudden the Rockies appeared in front of us. It was wonderful. It was just mesmerizing. Denver itself, great place. A very interesting city with interesting things to do. I'll get to that. The conference itself was awesome. It was the second time I went to MicroConf, the first time
mm,
being in 2019 in
okay.
Dubrovnik in Europe. I went to MicroConf EU, which was great because we had just sold Feedback Panda to SureSwift Capital, right? It
Hmm.
was like 3.5 months after that. So we were still kind of in the transitionary period, but we were mostly done because we had built a very easily transitionable business. And then I think Kevin McCardle from SureSwift, he asked us to, well, maybe give a talk, give a little attendee talk, just talk to people, share the story of you selling the business and how you did it, what you built the business
Sure.
to be so easily acquired. Because he apparently, which is something I'm very happy about, had a good time acquiring our business, and that's always nice, right? When
Yeah.
your acquirer tells you to talk about it, it tends to be a positive sign. So we gave that
Yeah.
talk. And that kind of put me on the map for my whole Twitter journey, for my whole writing journey. That was the first sign of credibility in the community that I could just amplify into building my own kind of personal brand. So I
Great.
have a lot to say about MicroConf in the best of words, because effectively Rob Walling kickstarted my career in many ways, right? Like
Mm,
with the conference, him being a writer, like both him and you writing amazing stuff, and me taking, well, if they can do it, I can do it, and then starting to
sure.
write. That's where this is coming from.
Yeah.
So I was equally, if not even happier, when I was offered to speak at this MicroConf as well.
Hmm.
And while the keynote slots were gone, there was still some kind of let's do something more interactive with the community, which is something I enjoy because I like to be in the weeds of things.
Sure.
So on the second day of the conference, I went on stage. I kind of talked to people about the fact that every prior talk of the conference involved some kind of mention of burnout or mental health issues. It was really noticeable. Like even Patrick Campbell talking about the acquisition of Profitwell to Paddle. In his slides and in his stories, he had like 2 or 3 different mental health issues that he just mentioned from going through the process of building the business and the acquisition and all that. And the people on the day before Dev Basu was there, he's talking about being too stressed and doing things that impact a small business competing with bigger businesses and all that. Everybody had a mental health topic, and it was so noticeable because that's not what I usually get at conferences, right? People share tactical stuff, technical stuff, strategic things, and use this tool and whatnot. But every single talk mentioning like burnout at some point, that cannot be coincidental. So I was super happy that my topic was talking about the squishy side, the emotional and the challenges beside the technical and operational. So I went on stage, I gave people what I just told you. Like I told them that I've been to MicroConf before, and I gave this attendee talk, and I kind of told them what I had talked about during the attendee talk, all of which was like, oh, we did this amazing thing and we did that amazing thing. We built the documentation here and that, and it worked great. So all the highlight things, nothing negative. And I said, what I didn't tell people at the time was that I was still mid burnout while I gave that talk. Right. Yeah. So I kind of introduced the topic that we show the good stuff, but we feel everything. Right. Yeah. And then from there, I just took it to a couple darker places in my personal experience, being overwhelmed with work and being socially isolated through being a founder because nobody understands what you're doing. Right. People want you to take a job, or they want you to, get back to freelancing because at least the money is better. Like all that kind of stuff where people just don't get you. Yeah. And one of the things that I will probably never forget from this talk was the interactive part. I told people, you're sitting in a room with 250 other founders who understand exactly what you're doing, right? They understand exactly what you're feeling. They all have the same challenges. We all have felt that. Why am I doing this? This is not working. We all have felt this is too much. I need to scale back a little bit to pull you in at this point. We all know the feeling of, I don't want to hire and fire people. This is too much for me. I just want to, code away. That's what I want. Everybody understands this. And I told people, around you are people that will get what you say. They will support you in whatever you say or do. And they may have a solution, or they may just have the ears that you need right now to be heard, to be perceived as one of us. So the conference venue was just round tables of like 6 to 8 people each, everybody facing the stage, but they were round tables. So I said, well, you're sitting at those round tables with like 6 to 8 people. Why don't you talk to each other? So I gave people a 15-minute time frame twice throughout this hour to just exchange stories. And I gave this initial example of my own life, how I felt extremely overwhelmed by work and sat on at 3 a.m, sat on my desk or sat in front of my computer just crying because I couldn't handle it. It kind of anchored people's expectations of what they can share. Sure. And effectively, I gave them permission to talk about whatever kind of ailed them, right? Which something that most people that were there never really got the chance to do with anybody else, because nobody invited it, nobody expected it, nobody allowed them to do it. Yeah. And the craziest thing, the thing that I will never forget, was me telling people, you have the floor, 15 minutes, chat about whatever you want. And I walked off stage, and before I even reached the end of the stage, the room was full of conversation. Like out of these 250 people, 250 of them had a story ready. They had a mental health issue that they've been carrying with them for years right there to tell. And that was something that just made it so clear, so obvious that this whole field of being overwhelmed, like dealing with imposter syndrome, burnout, and all that is something so extremely common, yet never conversed about, never exchanged between people. So we did that twice. Once with being overwhelmed, once with being socially isolated, and then, and ended the conversation, had a little Q&A, which was nice. And then afterwards, I was got an avalanche of people coming to me and saying, this was the first time I ever got to talk about this. Or I was sitting at a table where I could see people's faces detensify, if that's a word, get way less tense after talking about something that they had never shared publicly with anybody else. Yeah, it was an incredible experience. I'm very grateful again for being at this stage, or being allowed to help people help themselves in this way. It was a wonderful thing to do. I'm glad that I got to do it.
What did you take away from that? Anything that you I don't know. Clearly that resonated. Did you feel like you wanted to sort of run with that topic, that idea any further?
I keep getting back to this topic. I think that's kind of how I started blogging. Like out of the first 8 or so blog posts that I wrote, 4 were mental health related because it was just so present in my life still at that point. Because I started right after we sold, so I was still mid burnout. I had all these feelings and things that I needed to deal with, and writing is a great way to kind of take it out of your mind and put it onto paper or hard disks, whatever it may be. So I felt very validated in never letting go of the topic, even though I have other things to talk about as well now with calm businesses, SaaS, and building an audience and building in public. A lot of that is not necessarily mental health specific, but I want to make this even more of a thing, like to talk about this even more, to encourage people to share and to actively motivate people that are in the process of opening up to keep doing it and inviting people into it. I don't really have any like specific things other than I want to do this again and more of, that's kind of how I feel. But I guess I got the speaker bug. That might be what it is. Like I really want to go back on stage and share things that I can share with people, because the fact that I could tell them to do something and then it actually resonated so much that they willingly did it again, and like 20 minutes later, like without even being asked, like they were like, hey, I want to talk about this now. That's just show that was kind of like speaker market fit. Is that what it is? Like there was a very obvious connection that people, they were really just waiting for permission to do this, right? They were waiting for somebody to give them the heads up. It's fine to talk about this, right? They give them the anchor, give them that I suffer through this. You probably too. Now you can talk about it because you heard my story situation. It was
I wonder if we could recreate that on Zoom, just like intermittently, like just to do something and just invite a bunch of people onto Zoom and break them out into tables like that and do it through the internet.
Founders Anonymous. We're gonna do that. Yeah, I honestly, I would not be surprised if that could work. I mean, if people can go to psychotherapy on Zoom, then they can probably be in a founder self-help group on Zoom. And it's nothing. That's the thing that I noticed. That the thing that's still kind of a taboo around these topics, like therapy, it's always been a problem that people don't do enough therapy, even though people know that therapy works. Self-help always feels kind of dirty. Feels kind of like you've lost control, as if your mind is not a thing upon itself that does weird stuff, right? That you barely have control over. So there's a lot of taboo, a lot of not wanting to be vulnerable in front of other people, particularly not your competitors or your peers. There's like a social stratification around that. I would like to do this. I would like to do more of this, not exclusively.
Not that much. I think I know what you're saying. I think I disagree a little bit that there's that much pushback. I think you saw firsthand that actually, honestly, like all people need is just like a little bit of a permission structure to be open and honest, and like just a little nudge, like, hey, why don't you guys over there talk to each other about it? And they're like, yeah, great. Nobody's like, whoa, what am I worried about? Like, the taboo and blah, blah, blah. It's like, nope, I'm ready to go as soon as somebody says it. So I think there's definitely some opportunity to just keep that nudge going for sure.
I would like to. And I'm not a mental health professional or psychologist of any kind, but I'm a burnout, I don't know, survivor, the right phrase. I've been through it. So I know like how much it impacts you. I had Dr. Sherry Walling on every Walling was involved in my last week, like all of them. I had her on my podcast and we talked about burnout as well, and imposter syndrome and isolation, the topics that I talked about there as well. It's something that is really ubiquitous in our community. Like we all feel kind of misunderstood, overwhelmed by having to wear all the hats at the same time. You know best what it feels like, right? Like you've been both on the business side and now looking at the fund, like you're juggling with all of these things. The fund operator and star grade podcaster. All of this needs to be in one person, right? It is a lot of work. Even though we're doing this here just as a conversation, it still is also one more thing to do, right? So everybody can kind of relate to that. So yeah, I want to keep like getting more experts, honestly, into my circle, because I think Sherry, she's already established. Like she wrote the Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together, which is a great book that I read when I was selling the business, and it really helped me just kind of calm down, relax, set a couple of boundaries and priorities in my life. and she's already in that community, but she's one of the 3 or 4 people that are talking about mental health issues in a community of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. That is not enough. So I kind of want to pull in more experts into the space now that I have some reach, can probably grab them and pull them in, which is going to be great. So yeah, I'm going to do more of that.
Cool.
Just exposing the topic more. And other than that, conference was great. Like, conference itself was great. Like, we did cool things. We went to, there was like a pub crawl in the middle of the day, which was interesting. A weed tour that was in there too. Like, it was just a lot going on in Denver, the Mile High City. I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah.
So it was
Oh.
it was great. Like, catering was good, but you can tell that this is a conference that has been around for a long while. Like, people are getting really good at making the conference happen. Like, particularly with Xander, the producer of the whole thing. He's been doing this for many a year now. He was there in Europe when I was there, so he's been doing every single one since. I mean, there hasn't been much like with the pandemic, but still, like, the production value is spectacular. And I would like to see more of this because, as I said, like, when I was sitting in the airplane on the flight home, I was like, yeah, I want to do more of this. Not necessarily the speaking, that's great, and if I have the opportunity to speak at any conference, I will take it. Hint hint at everybody listening. But it just being part of this community of people who willingly go into a place with other people like them to exchange, to learn from each other, to learn about new things, and just connect. I want to do more of this, and yeah, that was my week, and it's been a great week, I'll tell you that.
Love that. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, I had a great time. Is anything else that happened in your week, which has probably been like even more busy than this? Just the one thing.
I have a more general topic I'd be curious to get your thoughts on, which is kind of related to what I was working on with thinking about the future of the fund, but I think maybe more applicable to other founders, which is the question around founders who also have kind of an individual contributor skill set, and how should they be thinking about the evolution of that over time, right? The kind of like classical version of this would be the technical founder, right? Who, is writing a bunch of code, and part of the reason they get to be the founder is that they, wrote the first version of the app, and they were the first person to get the thing off the ground. And then the kind of basic advice over time is like, well, you should, you should hire developers as soon as you should, right? You should focus on wearing more of your CEO hat. You should hire, you should delegate, you should start doing less and less and less of the individual contributor role, to the extent that, people will give advice like, your job as a CEO is basically to just hire people who are smarter than you and get out of their way, right? And I wonder what you think about that, because, I have been going through my own version of that, with the individual contributor role being the actual investing, right? So reviewing companies, talking to them, deciding which ones to invest in, and then kind of negotiating those investments. And then also being like the CEO of this kind of small company. I could imagine you right now you're all individual contributor, but let's assume that, Bootstrap Founder Inc., right, starts to grow. You're speaking, you have multiple podcasts, you have all this sort of stuff. Eventually you have a team. I wonder if you have any initial thoughts around maybe questioning some of the default assumptions around technical founders or individual contributor founders should very quickly start to become just a pure CEO, because I also think it's a source of a lot of unhappiness among founders who genuinely get joy out of the individual contributor side of things, and they kind of feel like they should start to delegate all that stuff away, and they feel guilty for spending their time on that. I don't know. You have any initial thoughts on that topic?
I've seen a couple of people who really never wanted to be anything but a software engineer. Like, even though their business turned out to grow, and they had to hire, first they start with customer support, and then they hire some other developer, and then it turns out that they actually are a C-level and they need to act like one, and you put in all these abstractions, like you put a management layer in the middle, and all of a sudden you have team leads, and you still want to be part of it. I think what the best thing I've seen is when people never jump into the CTO role, but find somebody to take over the CTO role for them, and instead stay as like a head of engineering or a VP of engineering. That's like a VP of engineering still does engineering. A CTO just makes technical choices. That's kind of where I think this stratification happens. So if you don't ever want to be a CTO, then you shouldn't be a CTO to begin with. You should just like, be the VP of engineering and leave that space for somebody else to come in, because there are really capable CTOs that are not technical hands-on people, that are not like in the weeds kind of coding all night, or even doing things like architecture for certain kind of systems. Like you can be a technical decision maker without being involved in the architecture itself. You can make choices, but you don't have to do like kind of the grunt work. But that's kind of something that happens later down the road. I think the hard part is to be both at the same time and be ready to give up the thing that is actually higher than the thing you want to do. And that is something that I see people struggling with all the time. Like they feel forced to kind of they're pulled along by their founder peers. If you have multiple founders in a business, if you're not a solopreneur, and solopreneurs is even harder because you will never be able to not be everybody at the same time. But if you're like 3 founders, you have a guy or girl who does like the CEO things, and you have people doing the operational things, and you're the technical person. Well, they all kind of give each other these elevated founder titles, right? You have a CEO, CTO, CFO, CMO, COO, whatever CCC you got there. Sure. And it's kind of hard to see other people staying that and you just kind of ranking down into a VP role, or even a head of role, or, a senior manager off, or whatever. There was an interesting talk at MicroConf, the last one, given by Rob Walling, and he was kind of talking about hiring for bootstrappers, or hiring, who to hire first, like the hiring progression. And it's part of his book. Like he wrote the SaaS playbook, of which I have a copy right in front of me. I'm not gonna I can show you because you could probably see it. It's like the newest thing that he wrote, which is kind of nice. It's kind of a post product market fit playbook that he just got all of his tiny seed stuff into. And here's a section in there that was effectively the talk, and that was hiring. Just hiring, who to hire first, and what kind of groups of founders, technical founder, product person, or a designer and a coder, or just 2 people who have no technical skills, who they would hire first. Kind of this kind of progression. And one thing that he also said was, don't come up with weird and random titles in your for the people that work for you. No coder ninjas, right? Give them the senior engineer or the junior engineer roles, because just if you want to ever hire, it's much easier to hire a senior software engineer than whatever a coder ninja is, right? That's basically
doing that.
Well, some people they think, this is kind of my business, I can do whatever I want, so I give myself the title of this. And in this escalation of titles, right, you get from like junior to senior to manager off to senior to lead, and then VP, and then C level. And wherever you position yourself in the beginning, you're probably going to hire people under you. So you need to kind of rank up yourself. But if you rank up too high, or you want to hire somebody who's supposed to be over you in terms of skill level, but you have to outrank them, it becomes this whole game of weird org chart whatever, the Sudoku, where you kind of have to mix and match. Yeah. And that is something that I am immediately reminded of when you ask me this. That becomes hard because you don't consider necessarily as a founder that you're not going to be in charge of the company at all times. So that shift alone, to think that I might hire somebody not just to work for me, but to replace me or even give orders to me, even though I'm still the owner, that disconnect, that is something that I barely ever see, because people just don't fathom that. It's just, is this even a thing? Like, you can own a part of the company, but not be the person making choices? That feels kind of, what do you think about this? Do you think this is reasonable to expect, that somebody else makes choices even though you have ownership of the company?
I think that I want to encourage more founders to consider a pathway that doesn't involve constantly delegating everything to a bunch of other people. I think that playbook is potentially, so one of the things to sort of consider is, how easy is it to delegate the skills that you're bringing to the table, right? So how easy is it to hire someone who can do that part of the job as good or better than you? And, the technical solo founder kind of situation is the classical one. Generally, I think it might be good advice, because probably, you can hire someone who is legitimately, especially if they're giving it their full-time focus, a better software engineer than you, right? It's possible. Or the market exists, right? You can go out and with enough money, you can hire someone who can take on that role. I'm not sure that's at all true, for example, for my position, right? Which
Hmm.
is, investing in software companies. That's my individual contributor
Yeah.
role. I think it'd be much easier to hire a really good CEO of a small, sort of like 10-person company than it is to or at least maybe like an operations person, right? Like a COO, than it would be to hire somebody who can invest in software companies better than me. I think, for example, you might be in a similar position or other kind of like personality driven media companies thinking about maybe like The Hustle or something
Mm.
like that, right? Where like it's actually pretty hard to hire somebody who's going to do what you do, Arvid, better than you. Like
Hmm.
that person is first of all like hard to find, and second of all, to the extent that they maybe even exist, they're not like in the job market for you to go and hire
They have
them.
their own thing to do, right?
Exactly. So I think we're
Yeah.
going to see a lot of companies kind of developing this role where the founder, the kind of individual contributor founder over time hires some very high level folks to do at the kind of operations level, right? Maybe they're like
Hmm.
a COO, maybe they're even called a CEO, but they kind of also retain the like chairman of the board
Yeah.
position. Of course, it's like ridiculous, right? Because you might be like 15, 20 people. So, but like still, you have this like executive chairman sort of role, which is you're still the steward of the direction of the company, but there's somebody who is responsible for implementing that vision while you make your biggest contribution, which is this sort of individual contributor role. And I even think going back to some of our other conversations about the impact of like AI and how things like Copilot are making developers so much more talented, I think you might even see this reversal happening pretty frequently with a technical solo founder who might
Hmm.
also find that they still have the greatest contribution that they can to be spending most of their time writing code and shipping product. And they ultimately, at a certain point, hire their own COO to manage the company while they still spend the majority of their time basically writing code. But at the same time, they don't necessarily work for that person, right? They're still the person setting the vision for the company, while somebody collaborates with them on that and implements that for them. I don't know. I thought it was interesting just because my own situation kind of caused me to question that. I now, by virtue of scaling back the size of the company, am just going to be spending a lot more time in my individual contributor role.
Yeah.
And I'm actually excited about that because I think that is really where I make the largest contribution. So I just have been thinking about that breakdown of kind of, wearing two hats of individual contributor and kind of CEO, and how that might be applicable to some other companies. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting time to question some of the accepted wisdom there and to give founders permission to explore other
Yeah.
kind of configurations.
There are, I think, a lot of traditional structures where both the decision making process or the hierarchy of decision making and the hierarchy of contributing are extremely aligned, extremely connected. Right,
Yeah.
the more decision making power you have, maybe inversely, the more direct contribution you have in the business, and that's just how the structure is. That's how an org chart is, right? If you're up there, you make the big choices, and the little implementation things they are done by the little people. Don't want to be insulting, but that's kind of how, to me, an org chart kind of is effectively done in terms of compensation and in terms of power and impact in the company. It would be nice to see this being disconnected, to be like you can own the company, you can maybe even lead the company in terms of the vision of the company, and not the operational leadership, like the actual implementation of the vision, but the goal setting of the vision, like the vision generation, the generational part of that, so like how it gets generated. That would be interesting, and then you can still contribute wherever you are. If that was disconnected, it's just, I think the traditional structures of businesses as we know them is where this is very much predefined for you, right? The more individual contribution you want to do, either you have a really small company where you wear all the hats like a solopreneur, or what you are currently doing in a smaller
Sure.
kind of space, or in a bigger company, you have to choose between having impact or having power. Like in terms of the actual thing that you're building. This might be a bit of a simplification, obviously, but because it's just appearing in my mind as I speak about it. But it
Yeah.
kind of feels like there's this connection, and it would be interesting to see if we can just like undo it. We can just like be an individual contributor, particularly in the technical role. It feels hard in the technical role, I feel, because as the business grows, so does the product, right? You have this kind of alignment there as well. Business gets bigger, product gets bigger, or at least gets more detailed, has more features, has more interconnectivity. You need to think more about scaling. You need to think more about architecture. With that comes more abstraction, which kind of fits the elevation of you go from senior engineer who still implements to a VP of who makes strategic choices and maybe combines a couple things that only they could see from their kind of bird's eye perspective, to CTO who then does all the selling of the choices to the other departments, these interdepartmental things. That kind of feels like a software product, just as it grows kind of necessitates that. But if you keep it like intentionally small, like if you keep your company like around 20, 30, maybe 40-ish people, still a lot of people, but it's not the world's biggest software company, you might be able to still do impactful on the ground work and still lead the company. Like that seems to be, I wonder, honestly, we should just like look into the reality of software businesses and see if anybody actually does this, if people actually want to do it, or if they would rather kind of bite the bullet and take on these more abstract things, because otherwise the company's direction, the alignment between the vision and where it's actually going might be distorted. Because the only person what I think about when I see you, the only person who really understands where the conf fund is going is you, because you are that, right? It's your brainchild in a sense that it's still kind of connected to your brain. It needs to be, because
I think there's more examples than people think. I think as I started thinking about it, I started thinking of quite a few examples. Even in software, you have like Jason and David from 37 Signals who are still very active in design and programming in day-to-day sense. I think I heard an interview recently with like Dharmesh from HubSpot, who's basically sort of carved out this like technical, no direct reports kind of role for himself, where he's like the chief experimenter, essentially, just like tinkers and tries to find new exciting things that the company can do, but on his own. And I actually listened to an interview with Toby from Shopify recently, and he was talking about how much of a micromanager he is, and basically thought that the negativity around that kind of concept was misguided, and how he like really rolls up his sleeve and gets in the weeds on all kinds of pretty small projects and stuff like that. And then you think about like other examples, right? All kinds of firms, like architecture firms and law firms and stuff like that. The people who lead the organization are themselves still individually contributing, legal work and architectural drawings and all that kind of stuff. So I just felt like maybe the pendulum had swung a little bit too far in the common knowledge of what the person at the top of the company should be spending their time on. The idea of just like always be delegating everything that isn't, just always be delegating everything, basically, had maybe gone a little too far, and folks should maybe consider some other avenues there. So anyway, food for thought.
A lot of cargo culting, right? That's the phrase for this kind of stuff, where people just imitate behaviors by others. Yeah, I think that there is a wave, like the Basecamp people writing about this. Like, it doesn't have to be crazy at work is a great example of this kind of approach, right? Where it just doesn't have to be crazy. Like, it doesn't have to be like how everybody else does their business, and can still be a viable approach. And here's how we set it up. It's kind of what we're trying to do with the Com MBA as well, like giving people an alternative framework to setting up something, so it's not just hustle culture and a VC-funded business internal org chart copy onto your 5-person business. It would be nice not to have that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny that the examples you mentioned kind of made me immediately think, hey, all you need to do is just to be a millionaire, and you could do whatever you want in your business. But so maybe that's not the perfect perspective to take.
Very fair point. Yeah, sometimes it is difficult to extrapolate from people who've already achieved like significant success, that you got to really turn back the dials and see if they, if that's something that they was part of their trajectory to success, or something that once they got super successful, then they unwound their roles to that. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah,
I would assume like the thing that comes to my mind here is when the business doesn't need you in the C-level position, when it's still running well, when you found a way to give somebody else the job that you don't want to do because it's not your level of where you want to be, and the business is still successful. Like then obviously you can do whatever you want in the business or outside of the business. That's been one of the things that I love about Built to Sell, the book by John Warlow, right? The idea that he says is remove yourself from the business so you're not needed anymore and you could do whatever. Either you keep it running or you still work as the CEO because you kind of want to, or you get into any position of the business. Doesn't matter because the structure of the business is so stable and well documented and highly automated and all the other things that are part of it that it doesn't matter if you are in there or not. Somebody could do the job. Might just as well be you because, you get the benefits from owning the business as well. So maybe that's the trick. The trick is to build a good business. Hey, who had a thought? Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Oh, good. It does make sense, though. It's an interesting question. I never thought about this, so thank you for introducing this thought. It kind of also feels like this, in a way, is a mental health topic as well. Like, do I want to be happy doing what I'm doing, or do I want to do what I'm doing to get to my goal and kind of disregard what I feel joyful about? What part of the business is the part that keeps me motivated, keeps me like intrinsically want to go to work instead of feeling like I have to, because now all of a sudden I have these employees that I need to support with my C-level things that I don't even like doing. I want to hang out with these guys. I want to build stuff, right? So in a way, everything boils down to you being happy with your work. So I'm glad that this is one more instance that actually probably has a gigantic impact on people's.
I think you're right. I mean, I'll. This is from a private conversation, so I won't cite who it was. But I was having the conversation recently with a founder about exactly what you just talked on, which is that I think too quickly. Let me think how did we phrase this? So basically, in the very beginning of a business's cycle, there is the fuel that it is running on is getting to financial viability, right? You have to get the business to sort of be financially sustainable. But pretty quickly after you reach some level of sustainability, right? Just enough revenue to kind of have enough of a team that you're not constantly running around, like chicken with your head cut off, right? You basically have the team in place that can run the business. Then the most important fuel is the founder's just kind of excitement about the business. And I think what happens is a lot of times we switch to optimizing for that way, way, way too late, right? It's usually like, yes, it's not the most fun in, month 9 when you're working really hard because you have to get this thing off the ground and you don't have enough money to pay for a customer support rep. So you're answering all the tickets yourself. But then you kind of get there. And then for a long while, you keep optimizing for the financial sustainability and you realize at a certain point, oh crap, I don't really like this anymore. Yeah. And I think what actually the lesson is to learn to really switch that optimization much sooner. Like the second that you hit that sustainability, to really start thinking about, okay, now the most important thing is that I love this. And that's what's going to keep me focused and really crushing this business. And what changes do I need to make to really focus on that and make sure that switch happens much, much, much sooner in the life cycle. So I don't know, maybe something for us to explore a little bit later on. But I
like that. Yeah, figuring out when to hire, that will be, I think, a good topic for another discussion, because that's been something that I've always struggled with. I've just only recently hired people to help me with my media empire, right? Doing certain things that I don't like doing. So I figured, well, instead of doing them and kind of begrudgingly doing them, why not pay somebody who actually enjoys this? So I've been learning that about myself, that I can let go, even though it's hard, but I can allow other people to do a good job. So that would be a great discussion for a future episode. I would really like this, because you probably have way more experience there, but I have a lot of insecurities that I can share with you. So that's gonna be making for a great conversation.
First episode of Founders Anonymous.
Yeah. Well, why not? I mean, we should rename the podcast at this point. No, but I think that would be that organization. It probably exists like as a shadow organization where people aren't even aware that they're part of it, which is probably just Twitter, like the community that we're in.
Yeah, that's
right. It's just people that are outspoken are automatically part of it. So there's a lot of us, but I think it's really helpful to talk about these topics. So I'm really grateful that you even bring these things up. So thanks for bringing this to the conversation today. Yeah. I guess we should maybe kind of zip it up here.
Yeah, this is great.
Do you have any shout outs this week?
I mean, I will say shout out. Well, I have an indirect shout out here, which is, we let go of a bunch of great people. So if you've looked at the Conf Fund and said, "Wow, these folks have amazing, branding and voice and marketing and events and all that sort of stuff," and you thought all that stuff was fantastic, reach out to me. I've got a couple of folks that probably will need to be placed. A couple of them are going to take a little bit of a vacation, so this is not an urgent request, but that's my shout out. Is we've got a couple of great folks from the Comp Fund that will be looking for their next thing, and if you like some of the stuff we've done, reach out to me and I'll connect you. Yeah.
I second that. The people at the Comp Fund are great people, and they deserve the finest future places to put their talents to good use. Awesome. So yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it at that. That is a wonderful thing. Well, Tyler, that was great.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to catching up with you next week.
See you next
again,
week.
Hopefully at a better schedule than having a week off. But yeah, that was wonderful. Well, have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.
See you, buddy.